Hampton, Bria Grant, and Chase Williamson down here. We might just have to share.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna Hi. Great.
Yay.
First off, I'd like to give a round of applause for one of the cast members who's not here, Mr. Graham Skipper. In my opinion, a fantastic young actor who brings a gravity and a sweetness that you don't often get from a younger actor. He's by all accounts, one of the nicest guys in the world.
Absolutely.
Why don't you tell us about the casting process that you have cast?
Basically, all the lead roles in this were written for Graham, Chase, and Bria, and if you hang out with them at all, like, you'll probably get a sense of that. I think early on, Steven Scarlatta, my co-writer, he was one of the producers of Jodorowsky's Dune. Him and I, which is great, by the way, if you haven't seen it, it's an incredible documentary, but basically we just felt like there's a lot of good actors we knew that we could probably utilize in interesting roles, and there's Barbara again. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it just came from their personalities, and it's sort of, I mean, Chase's character is basically like me, and then Graham's character is essentially Steve, so I don't know if I've said that before, but...
I don't think you have, actually.
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
So yeah, that was a big part of it, and I've just been friends with everyone in here for years. So it seemed natural to cast my friends in it.
I would like to ask the actors, because they've all been fairly prolific in genre films. I'd like to ask them what they think stands out in particular about this project.
Can I also just say that, like, people ask us about the casting process, but really here's how it goes. Jackson calls you and he goes, "Hey, you gotta come do my movie," and then you have to do Jackson's movie. That's exactly how the casting process went. Sorry, go ahead. I don't know the question.
Oh, to answer your question, I think what stood out about the script and the story for me was just like the brother dynamic and how it's all based. Really, it's grounded in sort of a human story. And I have two brothers, so I grew up liking stories about brothers. Wild America, for example.
Home Improvement.
Yeah. But yeah, I really connected with just like the human aspect of it, and the genre stuff was just a cherry on top for me.
Yeah, I have to echo that as well, because Jackson had been trying to get me to read the script for a very long time, and when I finally read it, I've been in a lot of horror movies that have a lot of blood and guts and cool shit like that, but I was really moved by the story of the brothers and their dynamic and searching for their dad and trying to become young men and trying to become the people that they want to be. And, that is a rite of passage for every young person. And it really, his writing really rang true for me in that. And that's what moved me to say, wow, I love this story. Because every good horror movie is influenced by the characters, and you have to have a good foundation of the characters. And that was the aspect of it that was most important for me, and that, they got. So I loved it.
Hey, what you got?
The script is really good. The script is a really fun read, and I like all these guys. We read a lot of scripts, and a lot of times they aren't full stories. They're not fleshed out well. The character, there's something, missing, and there was nothing missing from the script. It was, the characters were well thought out. The story was well thought out. It had a good beginning, middle, and end, and it also had like a really fun, like 80s vibe even to the script. And since we all kind of grew up in that era, that was exciting to be a part of.
Did you have VHS games when you were a kid?
I actually didn't. I was more into like just 80s horror movies, and I just would get my hands on everyone I could find on, Friday night. I'd rent like 8 of them and then, watch them all that weekend. And I was, thank you. I was certainly familiar with them, but.
Like the animator, perhaps?
Oh, I've seen it like 100 times, but it's one of these things where I was very familiar with VCR board games, and I wanted to do a story like this for a long time about, some family dynamics and some drama and, get a little bit into some character work. And, for the longest time, I was just like, I can't figure out like what the engine of this would be. And I met Steve Scarlatta, my co-writer, and he said, he was like, I always wanted to do a movie about a VCR board game that opens to another dimension. And at that point, I was like, that's the best idea I've ever heard. We need to start writing on that today. And I think everyone Steve had ever pitched that to thought it was a terrible idea, but I loved it, and I think he's a genius.
No, it's cool because as a device, can't think of another horror film that's used. Thank you. That's used the VHS game
exactly
as a narrative point.
And it's also too, it's one of these things like I can't believe no one has done that at this point. Because as soon as I heard that, I was like, that's such a smart way into a story that's able to kind of connect all this 80s thematic stuff that I really grew up loving, and that was really it. It felt pretty interesting. And of course, like once we started it, I played like the 4 versions of Nightmare, and like any of the other ones that I could get my hands on, which was pretty difficult. But there a lot of those games like Doorways to Horror and stuff are very confusing. I don't know if any of you guys have played them.
You guys found a good way to. You do a very old-fashioned story, but with the MacGuffin here is not a Ouija board or something possessed, an item that you found in the garage. It's a new MacGuffin, and I think it's very clever. Even if you don't know that VHS games existed, you explain it pretty well.
Thank you. Yeah, and that was the other thing too. Is I remember when I was pitching this to financiers, there was so many people that say like, oh, it's about a haunted VCR board game, and they're like, what is a VCR board game? And so basically every time I would just have to give a short summary of it, and it felt to me like it would be really interesting to use that too and sort of do their version of the throwback horror movie, which in my head I was like, oh, it'd be cool to do like a Black Sunday Mario Bava style like horror movie VCR board game, which is a lot of the layout of the board is kind of reflective of that. But I hope that answers that.
Did you get to work with you? Obviously you didn't act with them, but did you get to come on set and work with them at all? See them at all?
I was on set a little bit just in the very beginning. But I was a producer on it, yeah. So all my stuff was shot in the very beginning of the movie. And then it had to be degraded enough to look like it was old, and then into the TV it went so that they could react off of it. So when we were actually shooting that stuff in sort of this faux dungeon, Jackson said to me, okay, well, maybe our heroes are going to be here when you're saying this line, or maybe they're going to be here, or maybe they're going to be there, we don't know. So we did it a lot of different ways so that hopefully it would work out.
Yeah, well, we did not have the house when we shot with Barbara. Like we basically I found that house probably 3 weeks before we started shooting. So it was a really close call, but yeah, we had to do quite a bit of planning ahead.
And I was one of those people that was like, what's a VCR board game? I didn't know, and I was playing the host. But initially, somebody else was going to play the host, but I wound up playing it at the very last minute, like just a few days before I was supposed to shoot my stuff. And I'm really thankful that I didn't watch the VCR board game because it was a little cheesy. Because I watched it after I shot it, and I just, Jackson told me to watch a couple of movies that he wanted to influence my character, like Barbara Steele from Black Sunday, and then Sister Ruth from Black Narcissus, and so I just, I did exactly what he told me to do, and he said, don't blink, just don't blink when you're talking, don't blink. And somehow he just really felt like that would do something, But I'm glad I didn't watch the VCR board game stuff. I thought it was cool, and I understood it even without watching that stuff. I got what you were going for, but I'm glad I didn't watch it because if you watch any of those, they're so overacted, and I'm an overactor enough. So if I had seen that, I would have been way out of line.
Guys, guess what else? When we push that tape in, we're not even playing it off that tape. It's a DVD.
Yeah,
How about that?
That's true. Although, wait. Also, just so everyone knows, we did put that onto a VHS tape, and we recorded it back and forth through 5 generations. So it has those scan lines and stuff. So
It's on a DVD.
we played it off a DVD, but it did go through the VHS process to give it that more graded look.
You just need to adjust the tracking.
Exactly.
You have a whole generation now who's like, adjust the tracking. I don't know what that means. Bria, Chase, tell me something funny that happened on set.
I don't know, the people that owned the house, Jackson found the house by just like walking up to the door and knocking on it and being like, hey, come in. And the people that owned it were kind of like kooky cat people. And there were cats everywhere and it smelled kind of like cat piss. I think they may have been like slightly deranged, but we thank them for their service. Yeah.
They bought us ice cream too. They were really nice.
They were
super
not
nice.
deranged. Oh, my bad. Yeah, I don't know. You?
And we shot there like all night long, so they were pretty nice considering we
Fine,
were
they
there like
were
all
great.
night. I don't really have anything. I will say, anytime you see me sleeping in this movie, I'm really actually sleeping because we were shooting at night and I kept getting tired and falling asleep in the bed.
Yeah.
So Grant would be doing a scene and I'd be like, oh crap, am I asleep or awake? You're like, you know that feeling where you're not really sure, so I was actually sleeping through a lot of those scenes. Method acting.
Yeah, extreme method. I'm going to ask the audience, has any questions for these fine filmmakers? Up there on the left there?
Was the video store, was that an actual video store or was that a set?
It was a real video store, and it's
Shot
still in
where?
operation. I've been a customer there for years. It's called,
In LA.
yeah, it's in Los Angeles. It's in North Hollywood, more specifically. It's called Eddie Brand's Saturday Matinee. They're open 4 days a week for 5 hours, and on Saturday they're open for 8 hours. So if you're ever in LA, go check out Eddie Brand's Saturday Matinee. They have a ton of stuff that has actually like never been on any home video format that they've gotten directly from the studios. So I've seen a ton of just crazy shit that you basically can't get access to anywhere. So
That's like the
highly
movie
recommend
geek's
going.
biggest claim. You're like, you can't get this anywhere else.
Well, they basically will take prints and like transfer it onto DVDs and stuff.
They got The Day the Clown Cried over there.
Yeah, they do.
My
You
favorite
rented it to me.
find was Leanna Quigley's horror workout.
Linnea quickly.
Leanna,
Linnea.
Miss Quigley.
Okay, right there, sir.
There's a poster in the background of that store. Was that something that they had there?
Oh, I'm really glad you asked me about that. Okay, so that's a movie called Where Dad.
Yeah.
And there's another one called Jesus Heist in the back there. And I got that from my friend Chad Pfeiffer, where basically, this sounds super weird, but he was working as a marketing guy when Scream 3 came out. And so they were like, oh, just come up with a bunch of posters. And so he came up with Where Dad and Jesus Heist. And I was like, dude, we have to use those because it's like their dad's a monster and all this stuff. And I thought it was like cool thematically. But I basically was just, I asked him if we could use those because they had a few other posters up there, which you can see a few of them. There's like Chud and some other stuff back there. But Where Dad, unfortunately, is not a real movie. However, you can find it in the background of Scream 3 if you're on the
As
lookout.
an exclusive, could it be directing and writing a film called Where Dad?
Exactly. Yeah.
One of the things that I like most about the movie is that you're rooted in character and you're almost like, the audience knows it's going to get to the scary stuff, but you are clearly, willfully saying to the audience, you're going to wait because I want you to like these brothers and this woman.
Yeah.
And we're not just going to introduce them, give you a big horror scene, and then come back to them. You let the characters breathe.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that I really respond to now, it just kind of takes chances and like it moves away from, more sort of more of like a familiar formula, because it's like everyone in here, I'm sure, you know, we've all seen Friday the 13th a million times, and you know, every other 80s horror movie you can imagine.
People Speak is my favorite.
That's a classic. But yeah, I mean, we very deliberately wanted it to, you know, take its time, and then when the violence happens, it would be really shocking. And, you know, I wanted it to be like a big payoff for the movie. And I just, too, it also, The Gate, I think, has some really interesting stuff where, you know, it takes a little while to get into the fun bits, but like you really care about all the characters by that point. And that was what we were trying to do, something similar on the writing level.
How about you guys on that, as far as focusing on a horror film where a good, at least half of it is just character-based, no scares, just we want to set up the characters first.
Yeah, we love that. We're actors. We love it. It's amazing. I mean, yeah, and it's cool. I mean, I think obviously it has like a creepy vibe, you know, through the beginning that we are playing towards, you know, in some way. But yeah, I think it's
Is it
it's
tough,
very
though,
it's
that
fun.
you have to ask an audience to be a little patient? Is that hard?
Yeah, it is hard, yeah.
I don't know. You guys not
You're
taking
taking a
it?
risk. You're taking a
Yeah,
risk.
people are sticking in.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a risk, and honestly, there were so many points where I think we showed it to different, you know, foreign sales agents or something. They're like, oh, if you just had like the opening was just like the dad got killed, or, you know, like sucked into the game or something.
Add an extraneous character and then kill them.
Yeah, exactly. And I just, it's like I've seen so many movies do that, and I'm just like, God, I just want to see something different, you know? And, I mean, and usually, whatever, it's like, we could name a dozen, you know, we could name hundreds of examples where that works well, but I felt like for what we had on the budget and, you know, the resources available, I was like, we should, you know, maybe try to approach this a little differently and see if it works.
For Barbara, I think you're generally on your sets, you're like a den mother. You're kind of very motherly and kind of take over and help everybody in their own way, because the veteran, you've made dozens of films. And Jason's made, what, 4?
Well, like,
4 this year. So my question is, how much different was it for you to put on the producer's hat and do that kind of work?
You know, I'm just starting into this producing aspect of my career at this point, but I have to say, working on this movie, I didn't have to do as much as I thought I was going to have to do, because Jackson took the reins and ran with it, and he produced the movie as well, and was just amazing in every aspect. I mean, you know, to make a movie today is a miracle, and he had the tenacity and the drive and the desire, and really, you know, gathered all the people behind the scenes and in front of the camera for this movie. And he also has a background working with Stuart Gordon. He was one of Stuart Gordon's interns, so you know, he learned from one of the best. And
Thank you.
yeah, exactly. And so really I felt, you know, like I was a sounding board for him a lot of the times, you know, and he's not afraid to ask questions like, well, what do you think about this? Should I do this? Should I do that? You know, I feel like I helped him as just, you know, somebody who would aid him in his decision making. You know, there's a few things that I actually brought to the table, but you know, it's a collaborative effort, and I have to say, I really believe, you know, for his first movie, he was, you know, an amazing captain. He just did a great job.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Right here?
So I loved the lighting aesthetic that you had going on in the movie with the magenta and the blue, and having just seen Night of the Creeps and From Beyond this weekend, they kind of do the same thing. But is that where you got that from? Is there a reason why you chose to do that?
It's a great question. There was a handful of movies we were looking at. The big one is The Gate, as far as like a lighting aesthetic that we were pulling from. From Beyond, definitely though. I mean, it's kind of in the title too, which we sort of got that from. But yeah, From Beyond was a really big influence there. And then actually the Rennie Harlan movie Prison is one of them too.
His first directing?
Yeah, actually it is. And there were a few others. You know, Poltergeist is in there a little bit with, you know, the backlit stuff with the hazer coming through, and you know, it's all foggy and crazy looking with that blue light coming in. I'm a big fan of that. But yes, is the answer to your question.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody else right there?
Yeah, so glad you didn't do any CGI in this movie. The makeup effects you had, it might have been partly due to probably the budget you had too, but I mean the Tom Savini kills that you saw in a lot of the 80s movies. So I've been watching movies for a long time, these horror movies, so I appreciate it. It was very well done.
Thank you.
Choice to do avoid digital?
100%. Yeah, I mean, basically all the decisions in the production were based around what the constraints they had in the 80s were, and we were trying to stay as close to those as possible. So, you know, we didn't want any like crazy crane moves and stuff, and we were really trying to shoot it, you know, kind of in a similar style to Phantasm, The Gate, and Poltergeist, and The Beyond, and From Beyond, and a lot of these other things. But all the effects, it's basically, you know, I mean, when you're on set doing it and like something doesn't go right, it's somewhat frustrating, but it's like you still just, you end up fixing it in, you know, 20 or 30 minutes versus having someone, you know, work on it in their computer for several weeks afterwards, and it's never going to look half as good as a bad practical effect. I mean, like you can go and see a movie made for $300 million and they have digital blood in there, and you're like, oh, well, I know what that
I think
is.
it's funny is that people seem to be a lot more forgiving of subpar practical than they are
Absolutely.
of subpar digital.
100%. I'd much rather see a bad practical effect than like, I think most good visual effects are usually, you're like, oh, I can kind of tell, but it's like, it just feels inauthentic, I think, and it's nice to have that. And I'm happy that's kind of making a comeback at this point.
Good gentleman right here.
Yeah, I was curious. It seems that CGI just seems to be taking over. It makes me, like, being a filmmaker myself, I can't stand it. I think it's terrible, you know, but it seems to be the direction it's going in. If this film was supposed to be taking place in modern times, would you feel that you may have used CGI?
Well, it is taking place in modern times, but...
I'm sorry, and not trying to go for the 80s look.
You know, honestly, I don't think I would, because it's one of these things, like, I feel like this sounds really mean, but that's fine. I think like most of the best CGI was done in the around Jurassic Park and like the kind of like late 90s, where like you kind of couldn't tell it was CGI. And
I can accept a Gollum and things like that.
yeah, but I mean, it's I don't know what I think it's just because a lot of these bigger movies now get made on really crunch schedules, and they're basically still trying to finish the VFX before, you know, like 2 weeks before the release date, and it's why you go and see a lot of these movies and they look somewhat unfinished. And
I forget one director who said it, but he said something like, if you can do it on set, practical effect on set, do it on set.
Absolutely. I just think there's like no excuse not to do it practically, so I'm with you.
Especially for a movie like this. You know, this movie is, you know, it's not the kind of movie that digital would really fit well. I mean,
No, not at all.
yeah. I wanted to run through the cast real quick and wrap up with a question of, if you found out that your next 10 films were going to be horror films, would that be cool with you, or would you not dig that?
I'd be, even if my next 10 films were just with these three people, I'd be happy about that. I mean, like, yeah, I like doing horror films. My next few movies coming out are definitely horror films or genre films of some sort. I love doing genre stuff. So, yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I just want to work with good people, good filmmakers.
I have a script right here, is why I'm asking.
Oh, I'll check it out after I see your movie.
Now, it's probably silly to ask Barbara this, but we will.
Well, I've, mostly worked in horror movies.
What's special about the genre? What makes it different than drama or action or thrillers, per se?
It pushes the boundaries of what you're comfortable with. It's a thrill ride. It takes you places you wouldn't normally go. But that being said, in answer to your question, I feel like it's all rooted in character for me. It doesn't matter what the movie is. If it's a great character and has a good through line, a good beginning, middle, and end, and there's something the character's fighting for, that's what's important to me.
Well, that's a great way to end. Thank you all for staying. A round of applause for our director and our cast of Beyond the Gates. If you liked it, please hop on social media, tell your friends. It will be out later this year or early next year?
Yeah, it's coming out through IFC Midnight, either toward the end of 2016 or very beginning of 2017. So I'll
Tell your friends.
Yes, thank you.